Okay, hello everyone, and thank you for coming to this class on generative AI basics. My name is John. I'm an employee here at the Santa Clara City Library, and today I'm going to be covering everything you need to know to understand what generative AI is and to get started using some popular free services. This is going to be a 35-minute class, and we're going to have room for questions at the end. Throughout the class, if you have any questions about something I'm saying or something doesn't, it's not very clear and you want to know more, feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. That Zoom Q&A button will let you type up a question, and at the end of the class, we'll go through and answer all of those. If we do run out of time, though, we have the tech center here at the Central Park branch of the library, and you can come in anytime the library is open and get one-on-one tech help, whether it's about generative AI or anything else. And also, this class is going to get recorded and it'll be uploaded to our YouTube channel. When that's ready, you'll get a notification in your email and you'll be able to watch the recording anytime there. But with that said, let's get into the class to learn about generative AI. Okay. So just to briefly cover what generative AI even is, broadly speaking, it's any program that uses AI to generate new output. But typically, this will usually refer to what's called large language models, or LLMs. And these are specifically programs that generate text responses to text questions. So you'll type up a prompt to it, you'll press enter, and it sends text back to you. But nowadays, these will often support file uploads. This could be text documents like a Word document, but it could also be images, and it could either transcribe the image, or you could give it just a generic image of something and it'll analyze it and see what's there and use that along with your prompt to respond to you. But generative AI doesn't just refer to large language models. There's also other kinds of models that generate different kinds of data. So a common one you'll see is image generators. So you type up a description of the image you want, and it would create that image for you. There are also newer models coming out, like audio and music generators. There's even video generators. For this class, however, we're mostly going to be focusing on these large language models and ones that'll output text, although we will touch on some of the other ones. Um, to dive deeper into large language models, though, because that's primarily what you'll be using when you use these generative AI services. Um, it's like I said, it's a computer program that responds to your written prompts in a conversational way. The way it does this is that it's been trained on massive amounts of data taken from the internet, like websites, books, and social media. And what that means is that it's been shown lots of examples of how language works. It's been shown, articles that have information. And through processing all of that, it started to piece together how to form language of its own. Um, and it can use that to generate outputs that can be useful. However, this does mean that it doesn't understand things like a human does. It can be inaccurate. Sometimes it doesn't really get what you're trying to say. So it can be a valuable tool, but it is important to know that it's not perfect. It can make mistakes, and you'll have to just look out for anything that seems suspicious and double check any important information. So to go over what we'll be covering in this class, like I said, you'll be learning everything you need to know about how to use these things. We'll be demoing this primarily with ChatGPT, but know that many of these similar services are going to function exactly the same. So once you see what I do with ChatGPT, if you want to come to some of these alternative services like Claude, Gemini, DeepSeek, they're all going to have a similar interface and they'll work the same way. And like we covered previously, there are some other kinds of models and different things you can do that aren't just straight text inputs and text outputs. So I'll be touching on some of those things, and I'll be giving you tips and tricks for getting better responses because you can certainly get kind of bad results if you don't ask the right kinds of questions. And rephrasing and adding more information can improve how much uh, good data, good information you get in the responses. One last thing to touch on before we dive straight into the demo is just talking about what's going to happen with the conversations that you have and what the models will allow you to do. Unless you use a service that specifically lets you opt out and you do that, all of these services are going to be using your conversations as future training data to improve future versions of the model. So if you're okay with that, cool. But it does mean that you should avoid sharing any personal or confidential information. Don't be giving out, details about yourself, anything that should be kept private because it will end up in the training data. But like I said, some services will allow you to opt out. So if it's just a privacy concern, maybe look into those. And also a limitation that, you shouldn't usually run into, but just to know that it exists, is that the chatbots won't let you or they won't give you information that they think is, dangerous or illegal or anything like that. Sometimes they can be wrong and they can misinterpret your intentions. So, it's something you might run into, but generally not too much of an issue. And with that said, I think we should just get straight into ChatGPT. Because as I said, ChatGPT is what we're going to be using to demo this. Um, It'll be, if you just Google ChatGPT, it'll be the first link. You'll find it right there. And then once you log in, you'll be looking at a screen like this. And pretty clear, it just says message ChatGPT. And this is where you're going to be typing your prompts. And just to demonstrate what this is, if you've never seen it before, I'll ask it just a simple question, explain what you are, and then you press enter. And after thinking for a second, it'll start to generate its output. And as you see, it'll just explain pretty much what I've already said. Um, it processes language trained on vast amounts of text data, and it'll go through some other tips as it generates this output word by word. Some suggestions of how you can use it. You can use it for learning and research. It can help you write and edit stuff. Coding, if you are a programmer, it can be helpful for that. And it'll just go through and, finish generating this output. So, it's covered most of what I said. Some other information that it hasn't quite covered is that, like I said, it's trained on massive amounts of text data, but it hasn't been trained on super up-to-date information. Usually it's a couple of months to up to a year old. What that means is that it doesn't know super current events. Like you can't ask it who won the last Super Bowl and have it to just know that information. But we will be covering some workarounds to that later. Like you can see down here, there's a search thing which will allow it to actually search the internet. But generally speaking, it'll only know stuff that's within its training set. But now that we've seen a little bit of an example of just how this whole prompting and generation works, let's get into an example that's more practical. Um, let's say, for example, you wanted to write an email to a neighbor. Let's say their dog was barking at night and you wanted to write an email to like ask them to stop that, but you didn't want it to come across as rude. You weren't sure how to phrase it. It's something that ChatGPT can help with, phrasing an email like that. So I can paste in this prompt right here. Just I want to write a polite email. Can you help me draft this? We'll press send. And what it'll do is it'll just kind of generate this email. And it has, the placeholders for the people's name. It'll phrase it nicely with a nice greeting. It'll explain the situation and suggest some things. And this could help you, if this was an issue that you're actually having or you had a similar issue in your real life, you could have it help generate an email like this, which would be, nice, approachable, friendly, and potentially worded better than you could come up with on your own if you were struggling with it. Um, so that's that. And you'll see that it generated quite a good output here. A couple of paragraphs, short and sweet, but it gets to the point. Uh, if you were having trouble, though, one thing that might happen is sometimes you could ask it a prompt and it won't really understand what you mean. Just one example of this, if I were to rephrase this, so I don't know if you saw what I did there. I hovered over this pencil icon to edit the message. And now let's edit the message to something that's intentionally not very good, not very clear. This one right here, write a professional email about my neighbor's dog. The model doesn't know anything about your situation, and this doesn't give it the context it needs to know what you want the email to be about. So if we were to send this, what we'll see is that, it's kind of just generic concern regarding your dog. And it's like I've noticed some issues. It doesn't have any specifics, and it just kind of tells you to write it yourself. And overall, this email that it's generated in response to our very basic message that doesn't have a whole lot of context, it doesn't give it all the background information it needs to know about the situation. This email just isn't very useful. So, uh, what I want to demonstrate here is that with the prompt that has all of the background information, like dog is barking at night, you want to maintain a good relationship. All of that is useful information for the model to know, and it'll generate a good response. If you weren't including that information, then the model's response would be a lot worse. So whenever you're using these models, you want to make sure that you're giving it all of the information it needs to understand your situation and the context, because if you leave it out, it won't be very effective. With that said, though, another example, if you wanted to, let's say this example, this situation was that you wanted to look for a new laptop, and let's say you're not very tech savvy, you don't understand what specs are good, what you should look for, and there's 1,000 different laptops in Amazon. You could send a message like this, and you notice, like before, we're including important context about what we're going to do with this laptop. Let's say you were just doing simple stuff, you want to check email, watch YouTube videos. You could ask it information about searching laptops, which is something that you don't know much about, and it'll help you understand more. And then, as we see, it kind of generates some things to look for. And, it'll give us its output. And this is stuff that you could go on Amazon or any other marketplace and look for and compare these specs with anything that you find. And this is cool, but also this is a pretty basic question. You can certainly find lists of good laptops and things to look for online. Uh, Kind of seems like, okay, why should I use something like ChatGPT instead of just looking at a website? Well, one example is that you can ask follow-up questions now, which is something that you can't do if you're reading an article. So let's say we were scrolling through this and we saw this line here, at least 4 GB of RAM. Let's say you don't know what RAM is. Is 4 GB really what you need? And 8 GB is faster. What does that mean? Well, if you're confused and you want to know more, you can just ask it, what is RAM and why does it matter? And instead of just giving you this initial spec list, now you can ask it follow-up questions to learn more. And this will, once it finishes thinking, um, explain to you what RAM is, and it'll give you the information that you need. See? Gives a short explanation of what it is and what it helps with. So if there's something that you're not clear about, that you don't really understand, um, instead of just reading something like this spec list, which might be just completely over your head, you can ask it follow-up questions and it can explain things in a way that you understand to help you, you know, get a better grasp of what it's saying instead of just blindly trusting something that you find on the internet. So easy, short little response, gives a good explanation, and it's giving some good examples of how it could affect your use of your laptop. So these are a couple of different ways that you could use just this basic chatbot. Rewriting stuff, helping understand things, looking for recommendations of what you should look for in products. Um, and for day-to-day tasks, these sorts of questions would be perfectly within the wheelhouse of a model like this. However, to cover some of the other options that we see here, like there's some buttons at the bottom that I haven't mentioned yet. There's the search, which I've kind of alluded to, but there's also this reason button. And this is a new thing that's been coming out in the last couple of months. It's a way to toggle into what's called a reasoning model, and that's different in one key way in that it'll actually stop and think about what you're asking it before just immediately responding. Because as we've seen with these two chats so far, we ask it its question and then it just dives straight into generating its response. And for something like an email question, that's perfectly fine. It can just rephrase that email without too much issue. But sometimes you'll ask it a question that's a bit more complicated. So to give you an example, let's say you were in the shoes of this model and you were trying to answer a question that somebody asked. But instead of just rewriting an email or, giving a spec list of a laptop, let's say this person asked you to write an entire novel. You wouldn't be able to dive straight into chapter one immediately and start, from page one writing that whole novel. You have to take a second to think about it, brainstorm some stuff, figure out what the plot's going to be. And then once you've done that preliminary work, you can actually dive into the final response. And that's exactly what a reasoning model does. So, to give one example of that, let's say now in this scenario, we're looking for a workout routine and we have some requirements. We want it to be with no equipment, which should be 20 minutes 3 times a week. And we want to include modifications if it's too easy or too hard. This has a couple of different things going on, and maybe the AI would need to stop and think about it for a second before it, really hammered in what it is that it wants to tell you. So what we can do is see that in process. So you see it's gonna tell you its reasoning here, it's designing the routine. Um, and then you can see in this little grayed out text, it can it'll show you what it's thinking about. It's brainstorming some different ideas. And then once it's done, it'll generate this workout routine. So you see, pretty standard. There's some different exercises without any equipment here. Um, a second set, and then there's the tips if it's too easy or too hard. And if we go back up to the top, what we can see is under this little message that says reasoned for 14 seconds, we can click on this and take a look at what it was doing. And you see here, it's just trying to understand our question, understand the requirements. It's brainstorming some different ideas like push-ups and squats. And then it'll go through its thinking for a couple of paragraphs here, refining its idea. And then, as we see, it eventually generates that final output that we showed. So this reason ability to do this extra step of thinking before generating the final response, this can be useful if you're asking it a more complicated question. It's not always necessary, but if you do find that you're asking a question that the models are just getting confused with and it's not really giving you what you want, some of these reasoning things, ChatGPT has it, and many of the other services that we mentioned have it. It can help uh, create a more, polished response. So that's another option there. So this has been, a pretty quick but hopefully helpful overview of the different kinds of ways that you can use the language model parts of these services, the text input, text output. But like I said, there are other kinds of things you can do. There's this plus button where you can upload files. So what we can do is we can look at that. Like I said, this can do a couple of different things. It can either you can take a screenshot of some text and then it'll just like transcribe it for you, but you can also show it images of stuff that aren't text. Like, for example, I have an example here, just a simple little toy one. This isn't really something you'd need a model for, but I have this picture of a giraffe. It's a little small there. Let's see if we can make it bigger. Yep, just a picture of a giraffe. And I'll ask it, what animal is this? And after it thinks a sec, it should easily be able to tell us it's a giraffe. So, if you had some image that was related to the question that you wanted to ask, and that image had important context that you needed the model to know about, what you could do is try uploading that image in addition to your question, and it'll hopefully be able to incorporate the information that it sees in that image with its answer. The same way I asked it what animal this is, and it, told us it was a giraffe. Other things that you can do, I mentioned earlier that models have their knowledge cut off, is what it's called. They don't have super up-to-date information. It's dependent on how recent their data set that they were trained on is. Um, and this is usually at least a couple of months old, and it can be up to a year old or more. But there is this search button at the bottom here. And if you wanted to, you could use this. And what this will allow the model to do is effectively do like a little Google search before it um, answers your question. So if there's a specific piece of information that you want it to know, such as, let's say, who won the last Super Bowl, You could ask this and make sure the search toggle is enabled, and we can see what it does here, searching the web, and it figures out who won this last Super Bowl. And we see it gives us some sources here, so we can go here, and if we want to double check that it was correct, we're like, yep, there's the winner of the Super Bowl, and it just lists its sources again down at the bottom. So what it did here was it doesn't know off the top of its head because of its training set who won the Super Bowl. It's too old for that. But it was able to do a search, find some sources, and then read those sources to figure out who won the Super Bowl. So if you were asking it a question that required on some up-to-date information, and it was like a specific piece of info that you could presumably find through a Google search, but you wanted to use an AI to search for it instead, you could enable this search toggle and it would do a search for you to find that information that it didn't know off the top of its head. Okay, so we've covered pretty much everything down at the bottom here. Um, we've covered how to upload files, how to search the web, and we've covered what this reasoning thing is. But we do see that there's some more options down at the bottom. Most of these are just suggestions of ways that you could do it that the ChatGPT developers think is useful. But there's this one interesting one, create image. So ChatGPT is a little unique in this. Most models don't have the ability to do this, but ChatGPT can support actually creating a photo based on a description. So let's say we want to create an image of, let's say, create an image of an underwater library, something fun, something a little unusual and out there. And this is a fairly slow process, so hopefully it doesn't take too long, but you can just tell it what you want, tell it to create an image, and once it's done thinking about it, you'll have an image here. So give it a couple of seconds to see if this happens. Image generation is a fairly slow process. Okay, here we go. And then once this loading bar is done, we should see our underwater library image. Um, yeah, so while this is happening, I mentioned, there we go, fun little image of some shelves underwater. So, this is little bit less practical as like a tool to be, researching and getting information, but it's certainly a fun little thing you can play around with. Just generating images using ChatGPT. And like I said, there are some other services that do this, but a lot of the chatbots focus more on the text responses than creating images. But, ChatGPT is one of the ones that you can do images with. Um, And in the initial slideshow, I mentioned some other kinds of modalities, some like different data formats that models can generate. Instead of just images, there are some that can generate videos, some that can generate music. We're not going to cover any of those today because a lot of those aren't free and, they're a little bit more difficult to access. These large language models that do, chatbot functionality are more available, but just know that those exist as well. Um, and then, like I said, the demo is with ChatGPT, but there are other services that do this. So I can go and take a sec to show you some of those that you might want to use. They do have a pretty similar interface, but the models are different. Some of them will generate different kinds of responses, like a different tone. And you can play around with them, see which one you like best. Some people prefer one over another. Neither is objectively better than any of the others, but uh, it's just a preference thing that you can play around with on your own. One of them is Gemini by Google. So if you just do a Google search for Gemini and then come right here, I'm already logged into my Google account and it'll just pull it right up. Um, but if you're not, you can sign up using your Google account. And then as we see, it's pretty much identical to the ChatGPT interface. You have your text box right here. You have a little add files that you can add files or images to. And then you could ask it questions exactly the same way you did with ChatGPT. Another one that might be interesting to you is called Claude. So it's Claude by a company called Anthropic. And the sign in thing will be here. You can either type your email or continue with Google. And um, It'll go through the, okay, I'm not going to go through the sign-in process, but once you're in, it'll look pretty much identical to these two, so you can do that as well. Um, that's, hopefully it wasn't too quick. I covered a lot of stuff, but that's an overview of the way that you can use these services, how a chatbot works, how you can send prompts and get responses, different ways of refining the prompt to make sure that it has all of the context that the model needs to answer your question in a helpful way, and an overview of how you can do, different things like uploading files, searching the internet, or using this reasoning capability. Now let's turn it open to questions. If you have any questions, use that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we can start going through them now.
All right. Thank you, John. Hey, everybody. I'm Paul. I'm here assisting John with the class, and I'm just going to be reading the questions out loud for the benefit of the people who will be watching this on YouTube later. So we have a few in the Q&A box already. And like John just mentioned, if you have your questions, now is the time to type them into that Q&A function, and we will go through and answer as many as we can before we run out of time. So the first question I see, John, is in relation to the exercise question. So I think they are talking about your home workout routine plan. Will ChatGPT also send videos to show the exercise?
A good question. So, I did mention that there are some models that'll generate videos, but those are still a pretty rough and like early stage in their development. ChatGPT isn't going to do that for you. Like it says here, forward fold. I don't know what that is, so it would be nice if it could show a video. It won't be able to generate a video for you. Um, the easiest way would be to just look at this and then, open a new tab, go on YouTube and look up what that is. You could also play around with using this search functionality and asking it to find you a video, but ChatGPT doesn't have the ability to watch the video and like check that it's showing you a video of what it's actually talking about, so it could be a little bit unreliable. So unfortunately, the easiest way would be to just look through this and anything that you don't understand how to do, either ask it, clarifying questions about how to do it, or just look it up on a video platform like YouTube or find a guide somewhere online.
All right. Thank you, John. Next question we have, is there a pricing model for ChatGPT that generates different sorts of information based on whether it is free or fee related?
If you're asking whether the responses will be different based on whether you have the paid subscription or the free one, it isn't. They'll have the same content in their responses. It's not going to like artificially limit itself if you're on the free plan. There are limitations on the kinds of models you can use. Some services, I don't know if ChatGPT does it at the moment. I think maybe they do. It says our smartest model if you have the plus. So there are models that have like more parameters. They're able to generate higher quality responses, and you often need to pay for their subscription to switch to the most premium version of those models, which will generate a better response. But the free ones will have, good models as well, and you can generate pretty good responses without needing to buy the subscription.
Cool. Thank you, John. Next question we have, where are we able to find ChatGPT? Do we have to download it like an app?
Right, good question. So it's available through a website or through an app. You can just search up the ChatGPT app in your phone's app store, or if you're on a computer, if you just do a Google search for ChatGPT, that's a little small there, but just search for it. It'll just be this first link. It's by a company called OpenAI, so this is the one. You click on it here. Once you log in to ChatGPT, you'll have it right here. And same as what we're looking at over here. And
Yeah.
same for, oh, sorry.
No,
Same
go
for,
ahead. Go ahead, John. Didn't mean to cut you.
yeah, no worries. Same for all of the other services. I mentioned Gemini over here. There's Claude right here. All of these are accessible through a website, but to my knowledge, every one of them will also have a mobile app that you can use if you want to use it on your phone instead of just a computer.
Yes, and I was just going to add that all of these well-known AI services are available on Android or on iPhones. And then our next question is, And I'm assuming they're asking you, John, what is your go-to AI system?
Yeah, I've bounced around a little bit. Right now, what I'm currently using is Claude. Different models have different pros and cons, like things that they're best at. Claude, lately, I found that it's the best at coding, and that's usually what I'm using AI systems for. But I know there are people who have, more like writing related questions or just general day-to-day stuff that use ChatGPT. Some people use Gemini. It's by Google, who's obviously, also the one who makes Google search. So the search functionality is pretty good in Gemini. Um, so kind of depends on what you're doing for what the best model is. But if you're asking my personal one that I use, that would be Claude right here for mainly coding related things.
All right. Next question, is privacy a concern? And you did touch on that a little bit, but maybe
Yeah, so
just
I could
reiterate. Yeah.
come back here. We had a slideshow right at the beginning. Maybe you missed it, but no worries. It's kind of a concern because, like I said here, your conversations are going to be used to improve future versions of the model. That means that they're going to be taking your questions and then the responses that the model creates, and it'll be using that to train future versions of the model. So make sure that you're not sharing any personal information or any information that you don't want to end up in these data sets. And, if that's just kind of weirds you out, and you don't want it to, you don't want your own stuff that you type to be in there at all, then AI models probably aren't something that you want to be playing with because unless you do explicitly opt out, which some services will allow you to do and some won't, your prompts will end up in those training data sets for future versions of the models.
All right. Thank you. Next question we have, is it too early to play with DeepSeek?
Okay. Yeah. So a very pertinent question. If you've been following AI, you know that all the buzz lately is about this new company called DeepSeek, who, I showed off this reason functionality in ChatGPT. They also have their own reasoning model. Um, if you search for DeepSeek here, um, the website should be working. Let's give it a refresh to see if that fixes things. Yep, there we go. Um, and then you could go start now and then sign up here. They've been having some issues. I believe you're able to log in now using a Google account right here. Um, and then once you do, it'll dump you right into an interface that you're familiar with. Yeah, okay. So yeah, they've been having some issues, but it looks like everything's all good right now. And they have a very familiar interface. Like I said, all of the others are pretty much the same. And their version of the reasoning is this DeepThink R1. So if you've heard of DeepSeek and you want to play with that, you can do that right now as well. And again, DeepSeek has their website version, or on Android or iOS, you can download an app.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Our next question is, when I query in Safari, I always get an AI explanation first, which I find incredibly helpful. Who is behind that AI platform? Is it Apple?
So what you're probably talking about is Google Search's AI overviews. Don't know if I can reliably get that pulled up, but it's something that both Google and Bing, which is the one that I have right now, you can go to Copilot and have it generate here, or Google will do it automatically at the top of search results if it thinks it has a good response to you. Just a quick little answer to your question that's AI generated. So probably when you do your search in Safari, if Google is your default search engine, then that'll be a Google generated response up at the top before it shows you the websites.
All right. Our next question is just how secure? And I think what this person is probably wondering is how secure is the information you put into a ChatGPT, or maybe do you have an alternate idea of what the question may be?
Yeah, I think they're just asking, how secure the information that they put into these systems are. And again, I would just reiterate this idea that the conversations are going to be used to improve future versions of the AI. Um, so, with most services, if you give it sensitive information, you want it to stay with the service. But even with this, I wouldn't give it sensitive information at all, whether it gets hacked or whatever or not, because the models are going to learn to repeat the kind of stuff that you tell it. based on the data sets that it's using. So you shouldn't be giving it this kind of sensitive information that you don't want out there in the first place, if that makes sense. So yeah, the data sets are fairly secure, but you don't want to be giving it kind of the stuff that would be bad to have leaked in the first place.
Yeah, and I'll just add that there are, th though they're rare, there are real world examples of information people input into these models kind of finding its way back out to other people when they search online or what, sorry, when they use something like ChatGPT. Okay, our next question is, I'm a researcher. How do I improve my research proposal to get a grant on a specific topic that you may select? So that's I think they're just asking maybe for clarity on how to phrase a
Mhm.
prompt or what kind of you know how you would go about getting a good answer.
Yeah, so for that, AI is great at answering those sorts of questions. So what I would do is refer back to this example that I showed here, where you have two different kinds of prompts. One of them has all of the information and like background info that you'd need, and one of them is just pretty generic and bland. So if you took this concept of just giving it all of the context and background info, um, and just expanded upon that. So maybe if you have a draft of the kind of proposal that you want to ask or that you want to make, and you need tips on like how to make it better, what sort of things would be looked for in a proposal, you could have it give you pointers on all of the things that you should look at, and it could also help you rephrase it and make it better. So AI is great at answering those sorts of questions. I would just give it what you have so far, give it the information it needs to know what your goal is and what sort of topic that you're doing, and it'll help you, refine those points and add new info where it would be most needed.
Fantastic. Thank you. All right, our next question is, are there any hardware upgrades needed to use ChatGPT?
Okay, so I think this person is probably asking this because they've heard that ChatGPT requires a lot of like GPUs and stuff to run. But don't worry about that. All of this is on the servers of whatever company you're using. So OpenAI is running ChatGPT on their servers, Google runs Gemini on theirs, and your own computer that you're using doesn't need any special hardware. It just is a regular website as far as your computer is concerned. And all of the heavy processing to generate this output is being done on the company servers that you don't need to, worry about.
All right, great. We have some tricky ones coming up, but I'm gonna ask them. So one person wants to know, can I use ChatGPT to generate a living trust myself?
Okay. You can ask it to help for any like legal documents and stuff. You don't want to rely on it entirely because, like I said, it can be inaccurate and it could misunderstand things. But if you want like an additional set of eyes or some feedback on direction for that, then you could use the model to help you with that.
Great, perfect. Okay, and we have some specific questions about AI models you would recommend for different tasks. Um, I'll ask them. I don't know if you have specifically ones that relate to these, but we'll see. So one person wants to know, which AI model do you recommend for a history search?
Um, for history search specifically, I think pretty much all of them are going to be pretty good. If it's something that there's already literature about, let's say you wanted history of like the Roman Empire, all of the models are going to have a lot of data about that in their training set, and they can, reliably talk to you about that. If it's something that's a little bit more niche and you wanted to use the web search functionality, you're going to want a model that supports that. So that immediately rules out Claude because, to my knowledge, they don't have anything like that. Um, and then DeepSeek, it looks like they do, but I don't know personally how good this integration is. Uh, Although Google is one that I have heard has a pretty good web search functionality. So if you wanted something that was a little bit more niche and you knew the model would have to, do some internet searches in order to find the exact details you were looking for, you might want to try Gemini first and then play around with ChatGPT and just compare for yourself which one you think is better.
Great, great answer. And someone else asked which AI you recommend for literature search. I think that what you just described applies equally to that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
pretty much the same answer there.
yeah. Okay. Um, Someone else wants to know, you mentioned that you prefer Claude over ChatGPT for coding. So they're curious what features of Claude, um, or what about Claude makes you
hmm
prefer it for that?
Uh, the main reason is just that every company that's generating these models has to make some decisions about what sorts of outputs they want to target most, and Claude is a little bit more geared towards generating high quality code. I find that ChatGPT just gets a little bit more confused in the details. There's also some handy features that Claude has, like it can generate a little snippet of code off to the side of the conversation and then have the main flow continue on without getting that out of the way. It's some other little nice to haves, but overall, it's just that the model is a little bit more accurate in my experience.
All right. Okay, we are running out of time, so I'm going to do one more question and then we'll start closing up. So the question is, does ChatGPT have any variability? So if multiple people use the same prompt, will they get the same answers? And if there is variability, how does it decide what answer you
Yeah,
get?
great question. And that kind of gets at a core principle of how these models work. There is variability, and the way it decides is actually just random. So when it's generating they're called tokens, but you can think of it as it's generating the response word by word, like we kind of saw, it started from the beginning and started coming outward like that. What the model does is it doesn't just pick one word. It says, I think there are four words that would make sense in this next part of the sentence, and then it kind of picks one randomly based on how much it thinks each one would make sense. So what that means is that you'll get responses that all make sense, but none of them are going to be exactly the same, even if you use the exact same prompt. Um, don't know if we could demo that right here. Probably it's fine, but
Yeah,
yeah.
sure.
So it'll have a bit of randomness and a bit of variability that's just designed by random chance.
Yeah. And I believe there is like a little regenerate response button at the end of the ChatGPT answers,
Right.
if I'm
Yeah.
not mistaken. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
So that could show you a little bit of the variability.
yeah. So if we just try again, it'll send the same prompt. Oh, I think we have the reason. Okay. Well, it's definitely different now, but yeah. So there is just if you wanted to get an idea of what the different prompt would be, you would just regenerate again, and then you could see the for yourself the two different versions that it created.
All right. Thank you for that demo, John. I apologize to everybody who we don't have time to answer your questions, but we are right about at 6:45, so we're going to start closing it up. So I'll throw it back to you, John.
Yeah. Okay. So like Paul said, we're just out of questions, but as I said at the beginning, you can always come into the Central Park branch of the library, go into the Technology Center, and there will be somebody there who can help you with one-on-one tech questions. You can ask them any follow-up questions about this class or anything else that's technology related. We have some other classes coming up. Another one is, more about generative AI. It's job searching using generative AI, and we're going to have more scheduled in the future. So you can check the library website for that. The way you get there is it'll just be sclibrary.org. And once you're there, there'll be a pop-up where it says stay connected. You can type in your email address here and subscribe and select to be notified of future events. And that'll make sure that any other technology events or anything else from the library that you might be interested in, you'll always be notified of those. And one last thing is at the end of this meeting, when you leave the class, you'll be automatically given a survey. If you could fill that out, it's just a quick little thing that'll give us information about what you found helpful and what we could do better for future classes to make them the best for you. Okay, so I hope all of you enjoyed that. Help you learned a thing or two about generative AI and you feel more confident using it. Thank you all for attending. I'll see you later.